Welcome to KRA's The Hub, the official podcast of KRA Corporation. And now get ready to hear workforce topics and trends you need to know on the go.
Hello and welcome back to the program. This is Doug Foresta, and so excited to have with me, or me with her, Maxine Suka, Director of Workforce Operations for Strategic Initiatives. And we're going to be talking about diversifying funding. Maxine, always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much for having me here again on KRA's The Hub, Doug. This is really exciting. This is a great topic to discuss, given the timing of everything going on right now.
Yeah, so let's start with it. So why don't we start with the why of it? Why is it important to for workforce professionals, for workforce organizations, to diversify funding?
Mm-hmm. Well, I will preface the conversation by saying, we have seen over the past 3 years, you and I have had conversations prior to this particular episode about the variety of different changes that our workforce development industry as a whole has been seeing. We've talked about workforce boards and the different roles that they play and how they can really be that intentional link between the programs that we operate in our regions and also how we operate them at, which is really the different types of funds that are used to operate these necessary programs that the community needs. So I know that this discussion that we're talking about diversify funding opportunities is, we're looking at ending a year, going into another year. Change is inevitable. We were talking about the season for change and the need for not just the workforce development boards, but really just workforce development professionals as a whole to take a look at other opportunities that can enhance their programs, other funding opportunities that can enhance their programs. So really, I wanted to preface the conversation by, just giving our audience and our listeners an idea of like what we're thinking, behind some of these questions. So when you're asking me, why is it important, to diversify funds? One, change is inevitable, as I've mentioned before. If you are in the workforce development industry and you know that you have your traditional funding streams, for example, like the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, so the WIOA funds, for those who are familiar with the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, the TANF funds, these are like the traditional funding streams that workforce development boards have always been able to operate with, and we have seen, and we have some very innovative and like trailblazer workforce development boards that have branched out of those of the typical WIOA and TANF projects and have sought special funds to diversify not only their portfolio, but the services that they have to offer. And really at the bottom line of it is, understanding your regional needs and understanding what the needs are in the communities that you serve. So it's really the importance of that diversified funding opportunity is to make sure that you are leading not necessarily with programs, but that you're leading with community needs, understanding what these community needs are, and then making sure that your programs are reflective of that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. There's that, remember Field of Dreams? They said, if you build it, they will come. But that's not always true in the real world, right? You have to find out what it is that they want to, what is it people need to come to or to come for, right? Mm-hmm. So I love that. So let's talk about, as you talked about community and finding out their needs. I know that one of the things we've talked about in the past, and certainly you and I have chatted about before we started recording, is about the importance of impactful collaboration. Mm-hmm. Can you explain a little bit about what that means? What's the connection to diversifying funding?
Yes, no, we've talked about it before, I believe, in previous episodes, but I want to be able to shed a little bit more light on those impactful collaborations. It's really partnerships now have they have evolved over time and need to be stronger than ever, specifically for the workforce development industry to continue to remain relevant. And we can take that discussion and dice it in multiple different ways, but for the sake of our conversation, it's, if you have identified a community need within the area that you are operating, and you have these impactful collaborations. This is, for example, it could be across training, like training related education sector. It could be across the economic development sector and workforce. Like, these are the three main, I would say, just key players that need to really be at the table to create an impactful movement or change. And we've talked about this before, Doug, and I think, if the root of it all is you really want to be able to be relevant and impact your community. And really, in our industry, we want to be able to develop these workers, strengthen the communities. If you have individuals that are working sustainable jobs, not multiple jobs, because we've also seen that in other communities where it's like it's the working poor, to be very honest, is, you're working so many hours across so many different types of jobs. It's like, and I think we mentioned this in a previous episode this time last year, if I'm not mistaken, it's just like you're living to work, and so work is great. There is dignity in all work, but if you can actually create these impactful collaborations across the board on the education side, economic development side, workforce, that can really be a powerhouse, to help the community all the way down to the individual in which you're serving, to customize the services that you're providing to them, especially because we've been saying time and time again that, change is inevitable. Industries change, high priority sectors change. I mean, the area in which any of our listeners are living in, like, their high and in demand occupancies vary and are different from other local areas. Rural versus urban, coast is different, West Coast jobs, East Coast jobs, so I said we could dissect the conversation and talk about it in multiple different ways, but partnerships definitely need to be much stronger. And in those types of partnerships, they also have additional types of funding opportunities that are not your typical WIOA related funding streams or TANF related funding streams. I mean, I think, years before, folks that are listening in have probably heard of the American Recovery Reinvestment Act. So those ARPA funds, which was, 2008 to 2009, the height of that recession. That is really where we had these ARPA funds. Thank you. Yes, the ARPA funds kind of come out. And I do remember, because at that point, specifically in the workforce development industry, we were focusing so much, I'm going to take our listeners back over a decade here, that we were really focused on like the green industry. So green jobs, medical billing and coding was like the thing, to do back then. And, it's just all of the different types of efforts around certifications to get into those industries. And then only for the industries a year later to not have the capacity for the number of people that are certified, to get into these types of roles. And now you fast forward to 2022 or 2022, we're moving into 2023 within a couple of days here. You say medical billing and coding, and people would most likely laugh or brush it off because it's, the use of innovative technology these days. You have AI that's in place. You also have other types of technologies that can really help enhance certain industries. And so I wanted to just mention that because, as we start taking a look at the shift of industry, of job, of sectors, the different types of partners that we can bring to the table that can spread out and provide a variety of different funding streams, it would only enhance our efforts collectively as a workforce system.
Boy, there's a lot in there. And, one of the things I'm thinking about is, you're right, there's been a lot of change and every community is different. And this is the piece about diversifying funding, what I hear you saying is it gives you the opportunity to be more innovative, more flexible, more responsive. And, yes, the people who there, as these shifts happen, many of the fields that are the talent that is needed, it will require upskilling or reskilling, right? And as you said, that's not always going to fall within the traditional WIOA, what we know is sort of the traditional, because my understanding with WIOA and these funds is that they come along with some stipulations about what they can be used for and how they can be used. Is that correct?
That's correct. So they do have those stipulations, and like with any federal funding, there are regulations around that. It's the bureaucracy of what we have to work with. And so that is it's not to say that it's not worth it. It absolutely is. And I think those innovative ways in which we can partner intentionally with education, economic development, just within our workforce development industry, that is really beneficial, for us to develop service delivery models, that can be effective within the communities that we serve, really having your pulse to the ground on identifying exactly what your community needs are, instead of, really kind of leading with, this is the program that I have to offer, and it's really not impactful or relevant at all, within the community that you're in. There really is a lot to unpack just within like a lot of the pieces that I had mentioned earlier. But I think, the one item that we really want to leave our listeners with is, if you're thinking when, should I look into, diversifying funding opportunities, or where do I even start? I know that we have mentioned, in previous episodes, additional funding opportunities that have already come out, and they've actually hit the streets, if you would, back in June. So and these are also other funding opportunities, like the ARPA funds that are led by elected officials. So really like the role of also like the workforce development boards, once they identify the community needs, they have the ability to also work with the elected officials within the community to be the advocate, to really push forward for these different types of funds. And whether they are private sector or public sector, I mean, everyone at the end of the day, if you are a community member, you're vested in your community, and however you can be impactful, whether that's through your network, elected officials, workforce development boards, small businesses and entrepreneurs in the private sector. You want to be able to bring them in and, put your heads together and determine, what are some of the areas in which, whether it's through other grants, scholarships, donations, that they'll be able to really create an impactful program to address the needs of the community.
Can you give some examples? Do you have any examples that you can give us of diversifying funding?
We have been very blessed to have the opportunity to lead some diversified funding opportunities. I'm going to just call out here on the West Coast side of the house. So, we've had the opportunity to lead I would say a grant for rapid response, like for the homelessness population. We've also been able to focus, and we've had some special funding also for Ticket to Work. So this is really under individuals who were disabled, individuals with disabilities, and we've kind of talked about this in a previous episode for the month of NDEAM, and how do we support individuals with disabilities. And so one way is diversifying funding opportunities and really kind of honing in on curating a program, utilizing those funds that can support their needs, and so that was one avenue in which we were able to kind of lead with. The most recent, a very recent example is really specifically with those ARPA funds. On the East Coast, we actually do have a project out in Washington, D.C., that's led also by the mayor there, an elected official. And the focus on utilizing these additional ARPA dollars is really, making sure that individuals who were impacted by COVID in one way or another would have the ability to be tied to a career coach. And the career coach is it's really more of like a fast track program to get these individuals retrained, upskilled, and also re-employed and obtain sustainable employment within the DC area. So it's focused on DC residents, and it's additional money that is coming in to operate a program to increase the awareness of just these are some, we have a great training platform, that folks would be able to tap into if they want to be upskilled or trained, or if they already have those types of certifications and all they really need is just, a liaison to get to just through the door of an opportunity for employment, they have the ability to work through them there. So not all of these programs that I had mentioned are just examples of them are going to work in everywhere, it really is. This is really why I have to go back again to impactful collaborations with your partners and leading with community needs. Because if the need in your community, those needs vary across different regions, but it is really truly identifying what that is and then making sure that the programs that you are curating or programs that already exist and you want to enhance them by adding on a diversified funding opportunity so that you can hone in specifically on whether it's a particular demographic or whether it's let's just utilize ARPA funds and that can be our supportive service kind of funding stream. WIOA also has opportunities for folks to receive supportive services such as, food assistance or transportation assistance, etc. But there are still those regulations and policies and somewhat of a restriction, for different types of services that you actually can receive through WIOA, through TANF. Here we are throwing out all the alphabet soup of all these different acronyms, but welcome to the world of workforce.
And I just want to say, just to be clear to our listeners that, and tell me if I'm misrepresenting this, but we're not saying WIOA funds are not useful and very important. It's truly like diversifying your portfolio of investment. If you're going to make investments, you want to have a broad range of investments because not everything, like you said, one thing cannot necessarily meet every need. And so this is becoming, this helps workforce organizations to be able to have more flexibility and more diversity in terms of meeting those needs and as you said, having impactful collaboration.
Exactly. And these are conversations that are not necessarily different than decades of conversations that have happened over the past few decades, just within workforce alone. In fact, right now we're having the conversation more frequently is because everything has accelerated over the past 3 years. Looking at the history of just kind of federal funding, we're not saying that federal funding is not impactful at all. WIOA is extremely impactful. TANF is extremely impactful. But we also know that federal funding, in the changes that happen within administrations, their platforms change. And I'm speaking based off of, experience within the industry where there were government freezes, like freezing money, that's coming to the workforce, the workforce services industry overall. So if you are operating, it's just the basic rule of business. If your portfolio has a majority of that portfolio is WIOA or TANF funds, and there's a freeze to it, then you're not necessarily able to operate unless those funds are actually unfrozen and you're able to move forward. And we've experienced that. And this is really speaking from the experience we've had over the past, I just say within the decade, where there were freezes in federal government. We've had to cut back on the services that we are providing, and it's all tied to federal funds, and so those were that was really, I would say, more of the eye opener for a lot of organizations and a lot of service providers, just within the workforce development industry, to really look into other ways where we wouldn't necessarily be so dependent on WIOA or TANF dollars, but really more of, let's look at other ways where we can still advance the work that we're doing. I mean, that's the heart of the matter here, is the community. If we're just solely relying on one type of funding stream or two major types of funding streams, and something happens that's out of our control, the community suffers. We want to be able to be ahead of the curve, figure out different ways of how we can expand these opportunities of funding, really interweave our efforts of integration and working with this really intentionally with our partners for the whole sole purpose of impactful collaboration. And at the end of the day, it's really continuing to strengthen our communities by developing these workers.
So by now, I am certain our listeners are saying, man, this is the way to go.
I hope so.
Now, the next question is, they say, well, can you give people some tips about where an organization should or could start if they want to start diversifying funding?
No, really the folks, I'm going to definitely say, like, the folks that are on the front lines and that are working, on the front lines with the individuals on a day-to-day basis, they have their pulse to the ground. They can understand also, like, what are their community needs. Working hand in hand, I would say, first off, with your workforce development board, the local workforce development board, and making sure that those community needs are shared and are on the agenda, advocating for those types of needs. Utilize the local workforce development board to be the linkage to elected officials, to those that are in higher seats policy-wise, that because they have a whole plethora of network of different areas in which they can either add to their platform to provide additional funds, or other areas in which other foundations might want to make some investments. And this is really in the private sector. We have had some really great successes in doing that in San Diego specifically. And I really want to be able to kind of tee up our listeners to know that while we're having this conversation, we're really excited to kind of bring in an individual that has, like, first-handedly carried, the local workforce development board here in San Diego, and was able to really, strategically plan out, this is how we can diversify the funding opportunities locally here in our community. And, I just, without sharing too much information, I just want to be able to let our listeners know that, in our next episode, we're really planning to dive a little bit deeper into not just the tips of how to start and where to start, but really hearing it from the person himself who was able to really kind of move some of these efforts forward, and also have him really provide us and our listeners with just the tactical approaches to consulting with other partners on how can you actually be very relevant and impactful in your community. Where do you start? Like, who do you begin to reach out to if this is really what your vision is to diversify funding opportunities? And we know that local workforce boards, they can in fact thrive, not just portfolio and business wise, but really in their vision and their mission to serve the communities. They can really be very impactful and relevant in doing that if they diversify their funds.
So stay tuned. So to our listeners, stay tuned. You don't want to miss that. This is just a really great conversation. I think something that is so important to think about, especially as it does feel like change has just accelerated, right? Especially maybe in the last couple of years. And in order to be receptive to that and to the needs of communities, we're going to need that diversification of funding. So, Maxine, I want to thank you so much for your words of wisdom today, and for all our listeners, like you said, stay tuned. There's more to come.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on here again, Doug. It's
Thank
always
you,
a
Maxine.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to KRA's The Hub. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. To learn more about KRA Corporation, visit www.kra.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back soon with a new episode.